Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video I am going to be doing a breakdown of the entire Cruiserweight Savage tier for Final Fantasy XIV. If you haven't watched my thoughts video, which is really just me giving kind of an overview and how I felt about all of the encounters, I would go give that a watch, because you'll know that I praise this raid tier very, very highly, calling it one of the best raid tiers we've ever had, and probably the best raid tier since Promise, potentially even better than it, and even beginning to approach the levels of Midas, which I think is the best raid tier that's ever been released. This video, I'm going to be going through all of my clear VODs, talking about the progression of each fight, each individual mechanics, things we discussed doing differently. Consider it an insight into the progression rating mentality that we have. Strategies that we come up with that really only make sense for clear it as fast as possible versus things that we end up taking our time with and really trying to iron out so that we can have an easier time doing them on repeat. It's just for the insight and because it's a lot of fun talking about raid fights, especially right after you've cleared them. So without further ado, I'm going to be diving into M5S right here, or Cruiserweight M1 on the Savage difficulty. And I'm basically just going to run through the fights, pause when necessary. It's going to be a long video, so hopefully you needed something to do today because you are going to be strapped in. So M5S against Dancing Green, in my opinion, is the most standard of all of the encounters that we have. It's fun, it's frantic, and it's very thematically sound. But it feels a lot like a standard Final Fantasy XIV fight. It does come with some of the downsides that Final Fantasy XIV fights have as well, but I think the theme and the amount of movement and precision that's required with it actually overcomes some of those issues, to the point where you may not hear tanks complaining about not having a whole lot to do in particular. You may not hear much about healers wishing they had more to heal in this fight. It's definitely, for a first fight, adequate, and we came in with that mentality, and I think it did actually catch us a little bit off guard. The first encounter in the second tier is normally a decent bit of a step up from something like Black Cat, for example, or Eric Tony back in Pandemonium. It's just more of a challenge, and you can look historically to see that with things like Proto Carbuncle, Ramuh, etc., etc. And this continued the trend, and in a very fun and acceptable way. Now, the fight does kind of do that whole I need to teach you certain things before we're really allowed to begin the fight bit at the beginning, and I don't actually hate that about Final Fantasy XIV design. When you do normal mode, it does the same thing, and then the normal mode somewhat prepares you for the Savage mode. But in Savage, they almost always add new cast bars, new skills. It's just a matter about how they do it. How are they going to inform you? How are they going to give you the visuals to actually figure it out? And Flip to A side, Flip to B side is one of those you really just need to see it once or twice to figure out how it's working, and then they can use it as many times as they want throughout the rest of the encounter. So Flip to A side is role based. Thinking back, I don't know why we did DPS on the flank and tanks and healers front and back. I think the reason was that we wanted the healers to move as little as possible, whereas the DPS had more freedom of motion. You know, Black Mage at this point can basically freely move. Red Mage isn't going to have any issues here. Dragoon and Bard especially not. So I think that was the logic behind it. But, you know, most of the time people put supports on, you know, the front, back, and left and right, you know, north, south, east, west. So logically, I could see how we could have ended up with healers on the east and west flank here, but it doesn't really matter. That's one of those super arbitrary things that, like, if people want to do differently, they can, and it doesn't impact. Light Party is kind of the same deal. We just copied the Light Party assignment from Black Cat, you know, Group 1 North, Group 2 South. It ends up working exactly the same for Flip to B side, but you got to consider this. Final Fantasy XIV design will often waste a huge chunk of a boss's health bar teaching you a very rudimentary thing early in the fight. And in this week 1 gear, we've already chipped through almost, 13%. And what's coming next is just a generic raid wide before anything of major substance has really happened. So that does kind of occur here. But again, the fight it's fun enough to the point where you don't really notice. You're just kind of like seeing the boss's HP bar, and you know you have to know these things before you see them later. And, even with that, the whole memory game of paying attention to new mechanics while trying to remember to check for the A side, B side thing, that is a proven formula thing for Final Fantasy XIV. Every time they ask you to pay attention to a cast bar in the middle of another mechanic, that's enough to really challenge a lot of the player base and even challenge longtime players who are just maybe not thinking about it in the moment. It like forces it into their thought processes. And with Disco Infernal coming up here, that's exactly what ended up happening a lot in our prog. So Disco Infernal is the spotlight mechanic. Now, This is where the longer you've been playing Final Fantasy XIV, the better your progression on a specific mechanic can go. While Final Fantasy XIV sometimes gives you the presentation of something being somewhat random or reactionary, it is an incredibly pattern-driven game. So the floor always alternating between one or the other, and then it's just a matter of which pattern it starts with, is a pattern in and of itself. You also can check the cadence of the spotlights being the same every pull, and that allows you to educate yourself onto a pattern of how they work. Now, the way that the inner spotlights work wasn't something I had to learn in Prague. I've had it explained to me, but I was able to pretty quickly identify that wherever the spotlight began, relative to the AoEs on the floor for Funky Floor, was a dead giveaway for where the spotlight would be later. Because again, the cadence of the AoE swapping and the cadence of the spotlight was exactly the same. So I made it a very immediate priority to look at where this spotlight began and then where it was when the spotlights themselves were required for the mechanic. And that is something that if you do that, it comes in massive handy. What I ended up figuring out was that if a spotlight starts on a bad square, it will be where both of the players later, specifically for the outside spotlights, by the way, it'll be where the players need to do that spotlight later in the mechanic. So a lot of people I remember were asking me while I was progging this. I saw a comment in the comment section for the Clearvod. How did he know what spotlight? How did he know where he was going to be and what spotlight it was going to be? That's the reason. And I honestly can't recommend enough if you're someone who's getting into raiding. I can't recommend enough that you think about these things. Like, you may not always, big brain it and see like the grand play. Sometimes they're easier to see. Sometimes they're harder to see. But if you can see them and you can get that explanation across to the rest of your team and it's valuable information for them, it's definitely a good thing to do. You have to be careful of false positives, though. I went through several pulls of this, of testing it before I was confident in saying that's how, we can make the determination. But it did eventually work out. I'm glad that it did. Inside out here, this was mentally confusing the first time. Inside out, outside in. Inside out means out first, in second. Whatever. Honestly, in-out mechanics have had weirder and weirder naming conventions. Chaotic recently had the side bosses telling you where would be safe, and then they fixed it and telling you where they were shooting, and that was a horrible idea. I hope that isn't the case for this one as well, where it was supposed to be the reverse, where inside out was supposed to be in out and outside in was supposed to be out in. Even if it is, don't change it, Square. It is what it is now. Everyone's educated. Everyone's figured it out. Do not change it retroactively, please. So earlier I pointed out how the 1 marker was where that spotlight began in the bad square. And as you can see, it ends up working out exactly here. I remember figuring out a different rule for the inside ones, but I don't think it's the rule everyone uses. I think next to each cardinal, or I'm sorry, how do I put it? If you were to take the middle squares in the room, the middle, like, what is that, 16 squares, and break them up into 4 intercardinal quadrants, it would be like, it always alternates. It alternates which one is safe in that quadrant. I don't know. I had some sort of really weird way of doing it, but it wasn't a communication that worked for anyone or would have worked. So they just ended up eyeballing it for the most part, which does get one of our tanks killed here. But you know what? After only 2 hours, that's not so bad. Yeah, and then the twists and all this, not to mention, dude, the music in this fight was a lot of fun. I really do think that and that was the big thing. There was a flip to A side in there too. You know what's actually would have made this even more challenging with the flip to A side, flip to B side thing? Would have been if, so there's the cast bar right there, flip to A side. If they never casted it, if it was going to stay the same, that actually would have been probably a bigger, like, not even mind puzzle, but I guess a mind teaser to make you get over. Like, if you don't see the flip back to B side, you have to remember that it's still A side from the last time. But he flips his vinyls every time. A lot of people didn't notice that the boss actually has vinyls on his arms. Like, if you see right here, his weapons are basically the vinyls. When he's, you know, spitting these AoEs out, he is spitting them from the vinyl players on his, the record players on his hands. So when he flips the A side, he's quite literally flipping the vinyls on his hands. I don't think it really shows well in the animation, but that's kind of the idea behind it. And whenever he does the AoEs and like does the scratching of the theme and stopping it and going again, it's his weapons that are doing that. So it's a fun little detail, not really a Savage specific thing, but I don't know, when you notice things like that, sometimes the mechanics just make a little bit more sense. So I like to point things out like that. Now, the flip to A side with the dance, pretty simple. But again, there's a lot of movement there. The arena constantly going back and forth. And the more time that's gone on with Final Fantasy XIV, and again, I think this fight exemplifies it the most, I think that having lots of AoEs going off at the same time while putting a precision style mechanic on the arena is a great way of creating a bit of pressure, even on longtime players, that it makes players kind of have to develop the skill of not just seeing AoEs and thinking that they just need to move. You know what I mean? Like, just the movement of the AoEs is a thing. Because that's why they put the funky floor on the ground while the spotlights are moving and then give the boss 2 different cast bars of inside out and outside in on top of flip to A or B side. It's just by creating even that small bit of distraction, it adds a layer of the boss just preparing a mechanic for later being something that's a little harder to track, which gives the player a bit more of a sense of progression. And the more time that's gone on, the more I've appreciated when Final Fantasy XIV has just AoEs all over the place that distract from the thing that actually needs to be done precisely. And I definitely noticed that here. Now, for Ensemble Assemble, I actually haven't seen how the PF does this, so I'm just going to kind of spitball. Ensemble Assemble is the boss will basically alternate between an in and an out AoE, or technically an out then an in. And all at the same time, the boss will fire a conal AoE at each player in each role one at a time. So he'll do 1 DPS, then 1 support, then 1 DPS, then 1 support. And he'll do that till he hits all 8 players. But he also fires a repeat AoE at wherever the previous one was. So you need to set up your players in such a way that they can bait AoE safely without hitting each other, and then also safely get away from that spot when it hits the second time while doing the in and out. It's literally a big dance with all 8 people. It's a dance party. And that's why, even though it's not a mechanic that really stands out in terms of like, oh, they've never done anything like that before, because they have done mechanics like this before, but not with the same cadence and not with the same thematic, well, presence behind it, like with the dance party thing that's going on here. So we ended up splitting all 4 of our DPS to one side, all 4 of our supports to the other, and then just dodging our own, you know, our own cones. Like, it just became everyone just dodges their own cones, and that's the end of it. North and South actually end up being wide open once somebody's done with their cone here. And after a few pulls, I pointed that out to people, and some of them started using it instead of just going back and forth between their designated spot. But some people like to keep the thinking process simple. I dodge out, I dodge back to my spot, and then I just go in out for the rest of it. But this is actually a good example of something that can happen with statics in particular. You won't really see this in PF, but you're more likely to see it in statics. With Zillennia, we got really used to DPS East supports West for a lot of mechanics. If you've seen my guide, if you've seen my clear VOD, you'll know that I basically split all the mechanics up to being DPS East supports West because it was super consistent. Because we had just done that last week, that really informed this week 1 strategy. And generally, when you're playing with a static and you're doing prep time ahead of a raid to get used to the players that you're playing with, those are the types of things you're actually looking to develop. A shared sense of commonality between how everyone will interpret the mechanics based on how that particular group has handled them in the past. And that is why we ended up going with this instead of looking for like maybe pairing people up and doing the dodges that way. It just seemed like this was the thing that made the most sense to us at the time, even though we definitely tried to solve it in other ways beforehand. That's just how it ended up working out. So you can see, you know, just the constant in and out. And what was nice is in terms of communication, you know, if you do have anyone shot calling this, you just shot call in out and everyone just kind of understands the way that those cones are going to work. Now, for Let's Dance right here, we actually did discuss what we thought was the absolute better way of doing it. In this first Ensemble Assemble, everyone gets, you know, alpha and beta markers, and you have to pair them up with each other in order to cancel them out. So when they explode, they just kind of have to be on top of each other. The very first thing we suggested was static spots. Alphas and betas standing together while doing the half room AoEs. I think the only reason we didn't do that is because we wanted to limit the amount of, I don't remember. It was something like we wanted to limit the amount of like paying attention to the debuff timers, like thinking about like, oh, I'm the 6-second debuff timer, so I have to go here, which I didn't fully agree with. That was a lot of the argument in P1S when it came to the red chains and the blue chains, where it's like, do you do this based on timers? Do you wing it? Like everyone kind of discussed that. I am of the opinion that was the better option, but we ended up going more with a Rotten Heart style way of doing it, where when your timer's about to be up, you go to the middle of the hitbox and then just make sure you keep dodging the left and right. So same deal, I would just call dodge left, dodge right, check your timers, and expect everyone to, you know, pay enough attention to get to the middle. You'll see here in this poll that didn't go perfectly. It did in other polls, but not in this one. So that's definitely something that I expected that the PF would do, was just set timer-based locations for the alphas and the betas, while then again dancing back and forth depending on where the frogs are north. Because once you're in the spot, you stop thinking about it. You just dodge the AoEs over and over again. And yeah, I mean, that just seems self-explanatory. So you can see here, like, I'm an alpha and I'm a beta, so I'm in the middle, and then mine goes off, so I step out. But that extra thought process of needing to move there is, I think, far too much to expect of people to do in like the PF or a scenario like that. So we get through almost all of them, and then this last one here ends up failing. You know, I think, yeah, they just both aren't standing on top of each other, and it ends up resulting in that. I don't actually remember. I see that one of them's in the middle. I think the other player forgot to go in. They were just standing in front of the boss right there. So it was close. You saw it where it was close to working, but not quite 100% grooviness. Now, fortunately, the way this mechanic ends up working, Perfect Groove is not make or break with any groups in any sort of essential way. Some people seem to think that it is from the damage buff that you get, but I'll be honest, what's more important is that everyone understands how to do the mechanic, and more importantly, doesn't die. The extra LB1 you get helps you get to an LB3 earlier and potentially give you an LB2 later, but the damage check on week 1 on a fight where people have crafted gear, crafted weapons, potentially Millennial weapons, that's 10 item levels over what the fight requires. Something like that is not necessary. What is necessary is that people don't die and have damage downs nonstop. And I find that people tend to conflate the two as problems that are, they treat them as if they have nothing to do with one another. They go, oh, we need the Perfect Groove buff to have the DPS, as opposed to looking at the sheer number of people who died, got damage downs. And yes, does Perfect Groove somewhat help to alleviate that? Sure. But like with any fight, doing the mechanics correct and hitting the boss with the correct order of buttons is always going to be the most important thing. It's like going back to Shiva with the ads buff, where everyone's like, oh, you know, we didn't get the ads buff, you know, so we're going to wipe. But then, you know, by a couple days later, everyone's like, wait, that's a joke. The ads buff is terrible. Perfect Groove is not nothing, but it's also not something that you need to have on 8 out of 8 people. You don't even need it on like 4 out of 8. It's an indicator that either what you were doing was too difficult for your own party, or required too much thought process, or was just ineffective in the first place. So I think as the weeks go on, the amount of people who will see Perfect Groove as nothing more than just a, hey, I did it correct, will probably go up. But it is something that you should strive for strictly from a proving that you know how to do the mechanic correctly perspective, which then increases your odds of success. It's almost like the buff is compounding the idea of you doing a mechanic correctly without being so essential to actually clearing the fight. And it's definitely a lot less essential than people think. Ride the waves we figured out basically in one pull. I mean, we saw that like one of them was close to the boss, one of them was far, and then we figured it would probably happen on the other side. We learned what 8th beats and 4th beats did. This is again a super standard Final Fantasy XIV mechanic where it's just about learning what all of the names of the skills actually mean, and then just moving in a way that makes all of them possible, makes the 8th beats possible, makes the 4th beats possible, and it's nothing fancier than that. So there isn't really a whole lot to say. I didn't expect there to be any real deviation about that, and I don't know if there was, but it would be surprising to me if there was, because I just don't know how. It's like a really, really basic rudimentary mechanic. I guess you could put everybody in the same line if you really wanted to. I don't really like that idea, but I guess, you know, some people would probably want to do that. And then it's just a bunch of, filler skills, a tank buster, a raid wide, standard 14 stuff. And then you have the Frog Taraj. This was basically like P8S light. So in P8S phase 1, there's a similar-ish mechanic with Phoenix or a snake that will either dash through the middle or just dash through the sides. So like hit its sides. The Phoenix hits the sides and the snake goes directly through the middle. And it had the same thing where there would basically be 2 safe quadrants and you had to split your group up into groups of 4 and then do the mechanic from the boss. In that case, it was like spread, pair, or light party, I believe. And here it's just pair or spread. And here the cardinals are always safe and it can never be the intercardinal. So they simplify, they reuse a mechanic that was from a final phase of an encounter and repurpose it in such a way that you can make it a mechanic in the first fight of another tier that's actually released along the same time. It'd be like if Proto Carbuncle had something like this. And that worked really well. We identified that ultra quick, right? We already knew what 8th and 4th beats did. So this is one of those cases where you can immediately begin to inform what you've seen before and infer multiple variations. So like as soon as we saw 8th beats here, we automatically knew, well, of course, they're also going to do 4th beats. So we can just pair up ranged and healer and tank and melee if they do that while breaking into our light parties. We hadn't quite ruled out the ability of a half beat yet. Half beat would have been a light party, and we were ready for such an occasion, but we never saw it. It's just the 8th beats and the 4th beat. So this is one of those mechanics that you see it once or twice and you can solve it through and through. And this is where the fight design starts to get a lot easier. From pretty much the first Ensemble Assemble onward, the entire remainder of the fight is significantly easier. So you'll see that this was really easy to figure out. Again, we saw these things doing conal AoEs. We saw people in spotlights. 4 people are in spotlights. There's 4 ads. When you've raided enough, that's an automatic sign that it's like a role-based bait, especially in a first fight in a tier. And that's exactly what it was. We were under the assumption there was no chance it could be anything else. And true story, from the moment that we really got past these handful of mechanics right here, we basically saw all the way to enrage. I think from our first Ensemble Assemble into the rest of the fight, I think we saw enrage the very first time we got past Ensemble Assemble mildly cleanly, if not very shortly after. And it's hard to say because like, that did not detract from the fight for me at all, but it's something I have to acknowledge because you have to be careful when doing that in fight design consistently, constantly like maybe peaking at about the 50 to 60% mark and then getting easier. If you do it too often, people notice and it does actually take away from a lot of the fun. It actually almost creates an expectation and a standard. And I think a big thing with Endwalker design, Shadowbringers design is that they started to create that standard way too frequently. And it was also especially true in Stormblood, where the second half of the fight was almost identical to the first in almost all cases. And they kind of struggle with that here. If they do that too much here, then it will become the same kind of problem. And I say that in anticipation of the eventual heavyweight tier. But it's just something we have to keep in mind, something we have to keep an eye out for and potentially provide feedback for in the future. As for the little switch up to Ensemble Assemble, instead of having alpha and beta buffs, they instead have the front and back frogs. And again, to go back to that, pattern recognition is a big thing here. Now, this is actually, funnily enough, this is the only pull I actually get hit by the front and back frogs, or this entire sequence of Ensemble Assemble. So, of course, it's in the clear VOD, right? There is actually a pattern to the way that the Ensemble Assemble itself actually ends up going with these half rooms. If you look in the back, the first pattern is always a front or back, then a side, and then the remaining 2. It can be another side, it could be another front back, but basically each of the 4 motions of the frogs can only appear once. That actually ends up being true the second time through. So you actually can treat this like 2 separate groups of 4 frogs if it helps you rationalize it, where after the first kind of point towards the back, there's only one more somewhere in the second half. You'll never have like a point towards the back scenario. It'll always be, okay, point towards the back is gone. Now I know it has to be left, right, or forward. Okay, did left. Now I know it has to be right or forward. So you can just kind of use it as an extra mental process. For someone like me, that kind of helps to be able to recognize when something isn't possible as it's happening. For a lot of people, it's too much thinking. So I'm just giving you a little bit of insight into how I end up rationalizing some of these mechanics in order to identify them and ideally avoid them completely as time goes on, which, you know, failed here, but that's just because I moved way too early. I was looking at the one I was going to dodge next, and then I was thinking about the one I was going to dodge after, and brain just didn't brain in that case. And then this last bit is really just a mix of things that you've already seen. And I'm okay with that because they don't really repeat mechanics for this last bit. In fact, there's brand new ones like these half rooms right here. We have to dodge 2 half rooms, then another 2 half rooms, then a boss half room, then do a mechanic, then do another half room. And it's a nice little just kind of attention check. I like to call them choke checks at the end to make sure that you can do some really rudimentary stuff while finishing off the boss. And then you got the same thing. You've got, you know, the frogs that we did the baits with earlier. You've got the actual the debuffs that people have that, you know, need to be baited. We actually had the freedom to choose supports baiting first, you know, DPS baiting second here, just the way our group liked to do it. But the rules are all established at this point. So usually seeing something like this for the first time, you can wing it because you've seen the frog tirages, you've seen them use backup dance, which is the name of this conal AoE right here. And you've seen all the other enemies just do things. Like we've seen half room AoEs, and these half room AoEs are from like not the very edge of the arena like some other bosses do it, which makes it a little bit easier to spot. Not to mention that the final spotlights are, again, more of a choke check. You know, it's got 8th beats and 4th beats, but the last funky floor here isn't really asking a whole lot of you. It's asking you to spread or get in pairs and then do an inside out or outside in. And that's it. Like, again, pretty much just pure choke check to make sure that you're paying attention and that you don't let your nerves win over your actual ability to do the fight. So, fantastic first encounter, really thematically fun, suffers from a few modern Final Fantasy XIV isms, but without really suffering, I suppose. It really more so just has them, but overcomes them strictly through fun and theme. And you know what? That's a great way for 14 to kind of maintain some of the design that it's inherited over the years without actually fully leaning into it. It gives them some creative freedom to do some really cool stuff and to focus more on what makes sense for the boss versus just, oh, let's be different for the sake of being different. So this definitely gets a really solid clap for being a really strong traditional Final Fantasy XIV fight that gives you a lot of movement and a lot of fun. So that's it for M5S. Let's hop into M6S next, which I'm sure you're going to be fascinated to hear. All right, Sugar Riot. I think this is definitely the encounter that people are talking about the most, and for good reason. Sugar Riot kind of exemplifies, whereas M5S exemplified what I think is a really great by the rules Final Fantasy XIV encounter. This is very much a mix of the old and the new. And we were promised that Dawn Trail, especially as we approached closer and closer to 8.0, would show us a lot more of the new. And the fact that we now kind of have a template for that, not even a template, but a good example of what that means, is very welcome. But it's not even so much new. It's more like ideas that we feel they had written off because they were just... they had received feedback or complaints about it before. Ad phases, boss hitboxes, locking players up so they can't attack. And they didn't care. They put all of that aside for this encounter, and it worked really well. It has the super traditional tank buster that just has a small hitch to it where the tanks need to pay attention to close and far, which one of them is close and far based on the color of the gun in the air, so some animation watching. And then the party needs to be at a distance that gives the tanks plenty of room to do the near and far without actually pulling the tank buster themselves. While that's like a really basic thing, it's been done before. It's nice to have tank busters like that force all 8 players to play some role in it, even if the role is just don't get in the way of the tanks, don't be too close, don't be too far, don't ruin everything by forgetting how the mechanic works. It's nice to just have that one little extra mental check. Also, tying the wings to the players, something I predicted that they would probably do, that they would add paintings to people in general, and they did indeed do that. And then you just have kind of a really standard start to the fight. I mean, you have light parties and pairs here, where you get flung to a safe corner of the arena based on whatever the boss is painting. And then you have Sticky Moose. Now, Sticky Moose is actually a really interesting mechanic in a really simple way, because Sticky Moose will target anyone except the 2 tanks with 2 AoE sticky bombs, and if the sticky bomb hits someone, it binds them in place, and if it hits anyone around them, will also give them a sticky bomb and bind them in place, which usually means a wipe, or at the very least, those 2 players are going to die. But the fact that there's no rhyme or reason other than it can't target tanks means it's really hard to come up with a 100% foolproof way to move people. There are ways, like moving one party always entirely clockwise and the other party always counterclockwise, and then the tanks have to flex. That gives people a lot more direction, but it becomes kind of something I think players really need to work on as a whole, and it's called just use your eyes. You may get it wrong sometimes and end up with a 3-5 split, but as long as you respect the mechanic enough to actually put mitigation on it and to pay attention to the number of people in the stacks and then commit to the decisions that you've made before the bomb itself explodes, it kind of just ends up working out. Not everything needs to be a series of complex priorities that get you to an exact solution every time. Sometimes a mechanic is just solvable by looking around you and doing what seems to make the most sense. And maybe you screw it up sometimes, but it's better than sitting there trying to teach 8 people such a super precise way to do it. And then that's kind of what Sticky Moose does, and I think it works out that way. I wasn't sure if the PF was going to figure out a way to do this more consistently. Maybe they would find a rule that we missed in Prague. I thought it was like 1 blast on each side of her hitbox, for example, 1 for each gun. Ended up not being the case. I don't know if there is another rhyme or reason to it that I still haven't noticed, still haven't found, still haven't read online, but just use eyes. Sometimes just use eyes is all you need and is like the perfect way of simplifying a mechanic for everyone in a raid group. So I'm glad it ended up working out that way. Now, the sugar escapes are a lot of fun. They end up being kind of like a Honeybee Light, especially this first one, where the semi-random mechanic is not quite as random as the alarm pheromones were back in Honeybee Savage. So the cactuses give off that vibe because the cactuses just start, or the cacti, I should say, just start popping up. And in the early pulls, you're like, oh my goodness, just react, react, react. You're not really sure like what the pattern is even like really looking like. But after you do it a few times, you start noticing that there is a pattern to the cacti and how they spawn. And once there's a pattern to anything, anyone can like line up all the potentials and figure out what is mathematically the best. So during week 1 Prague, it was everyone, you know, good luck, just dodge the mechanic and don't get hit because that's all that matters. To, you know, eventually someone laying them all out and saying, okay, statistically, where is the safest spot in the room? And the northwest side of the room seems to be the winner, like between north and northwest, depending on, you know, which pattern it is and which cactuses are spawning in the order. But because there's only like 4 different patterns, that's how it ends up working. And while you're doing the cactuses, you know, right as the last cactus ends, I like how I keep going back to saying cactuses, by the way. The defamations are ticking down. Defamation is a term we use for any massive explosion on a player that needs to be away from every other player. It's a leftover from the creator all the way back in Alexander, so apologies whenever I say defamation. That's what I'm referring to. So, you know, or if you really want top, you know, red is defamation, blue is defamation. I'm sure some of you know the meme. But it's the marker that we get. There's a stack marker as well as 2 get away from me spread, giant spread markers. And for there's rules to all of these, but like the entire point of the mechanics around the room is to distract you from how that works and to force you to kind of pattern recognize and come up with proper plans, places where those players can stand, places where the party needs to stand. And on a pretty short notice, once the pressure of the cacti is actually gone, followed by the AoE that you see here. Now, one thing I think goes really underappreciated about this phase in Sugarscape 1 in the desert is the constant ticking damage that the entire party is taking. There is not a lot of situations in Final Fantasy XIV where there is a constant thread of damage that is taking place behind your party in a sense, that is kind of out of sight, out of mind, even though you know it's happening at the same time. It's not the same as a raid wide that leaves a bleed afterwards, and then you also have to do a follow-up mechanic. It's not really the same as like an ad on the outside of the room that hits the party with something while they're doing something else from the main boss. It's just a persistent effect that is affecting everyone and damaging them. It's stripping shields when you're not thinking about it. It's Making the way that you calculate mitigation and what it means in any given situation different. It makes simple things like when to use Veil, Shake, or even cast a shield make a big difference, because you need to know when the server is ticking in order to make sure those tools are at their most effective for when the largest amount of damage is going to be taking place. And we could definitely use more of that persisting damage in Final Fantasy XIV. So small detail that actually gets more points from me than I think it gets from most other people. The rest of Sugar Escape 1 is pretty standard, you know, like this is just a matter of pattern recognition. There's one corner that's unsafe, 2 defamations, and the party. It's about coming up with a system, you know. You see it's 1 on each healer, so you can assign healers to halves of the room, and then you can just have it relative to that one corner that isn't available, and it simplifies everything. This double style makes a total sense when you think about it. Like it took us a couple of pulls to notice that like all 4 of one roll was getting the winged bombs and all 4 of the other roll were getting the non-winged bombs. And then the interaction between the sand and the bombs just kind of seals the entire deal with this one. You're able to really consistently do like, you know, group 1 left looking at the sand, group 2 right, and then, you know, 1 roll out, 1 roll in. And again, it all simplifies in such a way that makes it really solvable. So Final Fantasy XIV doing its usual and giving you the tools to figure out what is a lot of information at the same time. Followed by raid wide into a tank buster and making sure that everyone understands what's the actual party position will be. Again, playing into that whole color riot, requiring all 8 players to at least somewhat be paying attention to make sure that they either do the job they're supposed to do or not get in the way of the people that do. However, the real thing that everybody was talking about was indeed live painting here, where she makes a ton of ads, 4 waves of ads, all with their own rules. And this is not something we have had in Final Fantasy XIV in a long time. Yes, we do have ad phases where maybe the boss goes untargetable and summons a handful of mobs that you need to kill in a certain pattern, in a certain way, or in a certain spot. But an actual honest-to-God ads phase, I mean, you have turn 4, you have A2, and you have this. So think about that. It has been about 10 years since a phase that kind of functions somewhat like this, not even entirely like this, has really been around. And some people may point to like Halicarnassus having ads that spawn during the different stages that she summons, or something in that vein. But I think we would also all agree that those little phases are not anything like this, where there's a bunch of micro enrages, positioning requirements. The spawn rates is actually incredibly quick. The boss is active the entire time, both acting as an enrage tool herself by giving the actual moos their ores so that they'll explode, or even just getting a damage buff from any monsters in the animal farm being alive too long. It creates enough rules to inform you about how to solve it without giving you all the answers and forcing you to make one decision about one particular thing. Does the tank need to hold a Yan? Yes. Does the tank need to hold the moos? Yes. Do you have to kill the moos before ore explosion? Yes. Do the stingrays, you know, latch onto the first person who hits them? Yes. All of these things are rules that are true, and they will obviously give you the information you need to solve it, but do you put the healers on the stingrays? Do you put the ranged on the stingrays? Where do you actually want to drop the puddles? Where do the mobs actually spawn relative to each other? Where can the tanks actually drag the mobs? How can we get more cleave on the actual enemies? Like, all of those things come into play, and they're decisions that we as a player base have not had to make in such a long time. So I know that a lot of people are going to see this phase, especially week 1, as kind of a headache, but see of it as your opportunity to learn about the game in a different facet that will come in handy in the future should they ever do anything like it again. It's a skill set that has long-term value, and it's a unique experience that isn't present really, again, anywhere else in the game, or at least hasn't been in a very long time. Now, some people have pointed out that composition makes this phase easier or harder too significantly, and I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think some people are over harsh on some jobs and maybe index too much on how great Viper is. I mean, we had our flex player who was capable of playing Red Mage, Monk, Viper, Reaper, pretty much anything. He looked at this phase and said, you know what, I'm going to go play Viper. But there are plenty of groups that did not make that decision, and while they definitely would have had a harder time week 1, it's also not something that will consistently be a problem. The other reason why an ad phase like this is really good design is because in week 1, it is an incredibly difficult thing, doable with a lot of different compositions and incredibly tight in terms of the timing, in terms of the kill order. But as literally 1 or 2 weeks goes by, everyone will pick up more tome gear. You'll have more gear in your PFs in general from people who are clearing 5, picking up books, whatever the reasons may be. And suddenly the decisions you're making will matter less and less, and not in a bad way, but more in a I'm able to get through this more easily way. My job choice doesn't matter really much anymore. It didn't matter at the beginning, but it matters less and less as the weeks go by. So it's one of those fights that actually scales very well with getting new gear in terms of an accessibility bit, because it's not all about a ton of body checks. Yes, there are body checks, but it's not like, oh, here's 16 body checks, you better have all 8 people playing perfectly all the time. It's more like week 1, you can probably afford deaths technically in some spots, but it's not really a good idea to do so. And it will more likely cause wipes than it will, be a non-factor in your early clears. But as the weeks go on, you can afford certain mistakes. You can actually more easily survive the Yans stacking up their attacks on the tanks. You can clear through the ads and leave more room available. You can probably start to look for more ways to optimize, like having the tank invuln a Yan so you can cleave it on top of other things more quickly. Like, we actually kill a Yan right about here, right as we're killing the second Stingray at the same time. If we just had the tank bring the Yan onto the Moose and then we cleave the Yan and killed the Moose before Ore Explosion, that's more damage to splash on the boss. And that consideration of where your damage is going, how is it affecting the boss HP going down, all of those things end up mattering a great deal in week 1 and begin speeding up prog for other groups or speeding up re-clears for other groups later. So while like these arrows are just an attention check at the end of it all, which is hilarious that they end up just being kind of a little mini choke check. It's just a masterfully done phase. I literally cannot praise it enough, and I'm glad they finally showed us they're not afraid to actually do things in their raid. That's really where it gets the majority of its points. Now, I will say that, like Dancing Green, that mechanic is the peak of the difficulty of the encounter. Now, we do get the second Sugarscape. So basically, I had predicted a third Sugarscape in my original prediction video. The live paintings became the thing that is in place, although you do technically get a new Sugarscape during the second sequence. And this becomes a lot more standard like the first one. If you understood the rules in normal and you pay attention to what's happening, the lightning plus arrows, plus looking at the amount of space that's available, how big the AoEs are, all those factors that actually come into play, you start to see things that make sense. There's 8 completely open spots on the arena, for example, and there's 8 players who can, actually stand in them. If you also might notice that technically you can fit 2 players in a square, so maybe you can start to look for uptime versions of mechanics. And then this, which is just a mad, frantic dash. Everyone's trying to get away from the cloud. You have these 2 markers that need to stand off to the side. You have the boss being moved. You have these somewhat random lightning bolts coming down. You don't know if that cloud is going to move to the left or the right on the first time or the second time or the third time. So it's a really frantic and fun phase that isn't, again, a hyper strict piece of the encounter. You're really just trying to follow the Final Fantasy XIV rules that are normally there, and in such a way that satisfies the very awkward arena. And another thing is, this is a very oddly shaped arena. It's not completely uniform. It's what is it called? It's symmetrical through the top and the bottom, like a butterfly is. Like if you cut the arena from north to south, this part is basically symmetrical. It might be off slightly, but if it is, it's not by very much. But it's not a standard arena. It's not a circle. It's not even a full square. It's got this river that acts as its own mechanic in the first phase. Then they take the river away to limit your movement to the islands and the bridge. And then they take the bridges away and also turn this to lava, so you can't even survive actually accidentally walking through that. And then it becomes about fight knowledge. How many towers are going to be in each section? How many of these and how hard do they hit are there going to be? What kiting pattern makes it available? Are you going to outrange the boss like I do here, which obviously means that we could have had a better strat, but we also had a strat that technically worked, so it wasn't the end of the world. Are you paying attention to these, as I call them, stepped leader casts, because they're very much like Ramuh's little lightning flashes that he does that are very similar. The same ability, stepped leader. That's why I call it that. And then it's about recognizing the patterns of these towers here, which are very strange if you look at them. They're not like 100% uniform. Understanding how far the wings will take you. Which way do I have to go with the wings? Do I need to do this pattern? Do I need to rotate clockwise, counterclockwise? There are other patterns that are possible. How can I safely bait those stepped leaders without killing my team while actually getting to my own tower? But this is all more standard Final Fantasy XIV stuff layered onto, pun intended, a new type of arena. And again, that's creative competence, as I like to call it, that we like to see. yes, you can take the same ideas you've been using, spread, stacks, light parties, you know, going to certain spots, getting killed because of a 5-3 split and not a 5-3 split and just missing a little bit of mitigation. All of those things can be done while still being new and creative. You don't have to stick to such strict rules, and this fight, it gives me confidence. It gives me confidence that we are not just going to be seeing the same old 1, 2, 3. We can probably predict what it'll do. We're going to be memeing, haha, auto tank buster, auto raid wide at the start. It gives me confidence that we shouldn't expect that anymore. We shouldn't expect this every time either, but we can't just write off the idea of them doing something cool. And that was something I did in my prediction video. I said, there's no reason to expect they'll do this. There's no reason to expect they'll do that. But then they did, which is exactly what we wanted this entire time. It's one of those cases where you, with every fiber of your being, want to be wrong. But until you are wrong, you have to make your predictions based on what is likely and based on what you've actually experienced with the devs, and especially in recent times. This is what every raider needed to see to have confidence in the development team again for creating fun, frantic, and new or returning to something old feeling fights. This feels like that ad phase feels like old Final Fantasy XIV, and in the good way, in a way that makes sense in the modern landscape and doesn't detract from current raid design in any way. In fact, adds to it and shows, hey, this is something you were doing before. It's something that maybe wasn't wildly received back then, but you've learned a lot since you did it back then, and you should be able to do something new and creative with it now. I'm not saying every ad phase will be good from now on and that they've learned the lesson and it's going to be perfect and they're going to do it all the time, but the incorporation of ads into encounters in a way that isn't just kill these 2 or 3 or 4 mobs, before the boss's enrage actually goes off or before the individual mob. You don't have to do it that way. You can have waves. You can have the arena be kind of set up in such a way where the players are responsible for how the arena is used. Make them solve that aspect of it. And then once it's solved, the other players who aren't like hardcore, aren't the ones usually like at the forefront of prog, they have that information to work with. So it becomes a more collaborative experience that can gradually be expanded upon and even improved by the player base from those of us who do it during the week 1 times. Overall, though, one of the best fights they made in a long time. I think it's tied for best fight. Probably actually is the best fight in the tier. And again, clap, clap. Square Enix, you did a good job with this one. All right, and then we get into M7S. And now, in my thoughts video, I said there wasn't a whole lot to say about this fight. And that kind of remains true in the analyses. One of the immediate things that you notice, and I said this in the thoughts video as well, is the fact that we were starting on this arena continues the trend of, oh, I didn't think they'd do that. M6S had the ad phase. It has like the altered like ground and arena with the bridges and the slight elevation differences and the river and all that. This is, I thought for certain we were just going to start in the last arena, because why would they start us in the first arena and catapult us to the second and make us go to the third like they do? And like, that's just something they do for normal because they want to make it cinematic. And, they're going to try to make it as uniform as possible for the last, for Savage instead. And, yeah, they don't really do that. So let me write that off. No, here we go. They managed to keep a large portion of the normal mode intact with all of the phase transitions that we have. And that's kind of the trend of the whole fight. The reason why there's not a lot to say about this fight is because it follows the cadence of normal mode down to a T. Like, yes, there are new mechanics like latching people on to the vined buildings and the sides of the walls and stuff. But as soon as you see this, you can't help but feel like, did I even click Savage? Like, you obviously at some point you see the damage, you see the seeds, you see mechanics that weren't there, and but like at a glance, it's almost reasonable to think someone might think they accidentally entered normal mode. I like to call it normal mode plus, because Brute Abominator just like does the exact moves in almost the exact same order. It's a little different at some points, but not enough that you can't help but notice the similarities with this one. And I actually think it works incredibly well. Not something I expected to say. I kind of like when normal mode informs Savage in some ways, and then Savage really blows your mind with the new stuff. But usually, even just looking at Dancing Green and Sugar Riot, you have things that you're like, oh yeah, that'll probably be there, that'll probably be there, that probably won't. And here, it's like every single thing from normal mode is used. A few extra things are added in. The ones that are from normal mode are expanded upon slightly to make them even a little more difficult. Like, these ads survived, LOSing them, needing to interrupt them. So having 2 tanks in a fizz range becomes really valuable for this section. Maybe coming up with some sort of interrupt order in order to help reduce the amount of space that they cover up. Even just these 3 proximity AoEs, like they're all here and they're all just scaled up massively. It's tough because sometimes I don't like this. Like I can think, what's a good example? A lot of early mythic bosses in World of Warcraft, for example, a lot of them, it's almost like it's weird to see how little they actually try to do anything new or change. And, you know, with all the extra, with all the gear they get from Heroic, they basically just blast through a lot of the early mythic bosses. They're like formalities that should barely exist. But here they don't let the fact that it's very similar to normal mode affect the fact that this is still going to shock you in the ways that it does. And the ways that it does shock you add a considerable amount of difficulty to specific portions of the encounter itself. Like that entire first platform, the baits on the ground and the seeds exploding are new. The way that the pulp mechanic works, the pulp smash mechanic works, you know, now you have to be the one to make sure that players are spread, that they get out soon enough while still dealing with the split damage. Like there's a little bit of agency, but realistically, you don't see a whole lot new until you get to this section, and then you see the cage match, the death match mechanics, where he latches people on to the buildings themselves and makes it so that if they want to go any further than just right outside of range, they start taking considerably more damage. So that element forces you to solve the seed mechanic later in a way that doesn't endanger those players, and they can actually do whatever the strategy is within the constraints of being tethered to one of those buildings. And it honestly was the toughest part of the entire thing, was figuring out how to properly move with the vines, how to make sure that, you know, we weren't either doing nothing because, you know, we were so far away, or that we had proper ground markers to know where to go. Like finding the right identifiers to safely do that is a skill set that Final Fantasy XIV players are always actively looking for, but it puts it to test in an arena and in a state with like the boss's position that is incredibly unusual. So again, just kind of breaking the norms in other ways. Like this arena is incredibly unusual, but we all knew there was going to be some really simple positioning way to, you know, go about putting these seeds down. But a lot of the early groups, my own included, just looked for something that worked and wasn't necessarily optimal. Like as the fizz ranged, I take downtime on this fight. Like that's how much we were willing to compromise on something that made sense within the arena, within the conventions of Final Fantasy XIV that we were already playing with, like using the little, as we call them, the nipples on the ground or the lines on the ground, whichever one was more appropriate. And just using those, even if it meant kind of taking a bit of a hit, like whether it was more likely to take a damage down or more likely to, like I do right here, or if you were, you know, likely to be out of range of the boss, we just kind of had to forego that line of thinking, which, you know, most people go, oh, not uptime strat, you know, I'm not doing that. That's cringe. But here, everyone I know in this group, in other groups, was super willing to be like, you know what? Let's take the downtime, and if it's a problem later, we'll worry about it later. Like, everyone just completely undid years and years of like, yeah, we probably shouldn't do it that way, to no. I'm just doing whatever I can to not get hit by this. I don't want to damage down. I don't want to die. I don't want to kill anyone else because I wanted to do this. It was a big, like, series of compromises amongst the way that we've played before. And that's good because we haven't had to make those compromises very much since hitboxes got super large. So to force the players to consider that, it means that you really don't have to consider stepping out of range to be a bad thing for your rotation. Great example, Whoops took very seriously the optimization of elusive jump and piercing talon, knowing full well that if he was going to have to outrange a boss for any particular reason, that he might as well pick up that 350 potency ranged attack. There were plenty of times where he would do that over doing the play of, oh, let me arm's length or max melee and see, like, can I weave this in between? So
just forewent all the conventional thinking to make sure the team got the play that came in, while he still was able to optimize it and gain some potency over just taking downtime. Now, that's obviously different for every job, whether you be Monk, Reaper, or like me, who had to even step out of range for a bit and was trying to force movement that at least let me get in range for most of it. But the fact that that is a consideration players may have is, again, I think healthier for the game, because it's a way of engaging with the game that isn't just, how do I always hit the boss, herder? You know what I mean? Now, one thing I will say, they really, really need to consider making stack markers like that one, where the idea is obviously the whole party takes it. The fact that a tank can take it alone with an invuln, every time they do that, I wonder, like, did they not think we would just tank invuln that? Because everyone sees a mechanic like that and goes like, oh, why don't we just try tank invulning that? And sometimes it doesn't work, but a lot of the times it does. And I can't help it. It's just weird to me that they don't see that happening. Or maybe they do and they just figure, like, you know what, we'll give them the choice. They'll probably do that, but maybe they won't always have the option. Maybe something will have happened and they'll have to consider one. I don't know. It's just one of the only, like, weirder decisions. Now, speaking of weird things, Debris Deathmatch here, where you're tethered to the wall, and it's just like the 4 baited tethers. This was a really weird one because whoever made this is sadistic. There's a 2-minute window right here. In theory, it's possible to hit everyone, but you're risking going to 3 stacks on the mechanic in order to do it, and that is really rough. I actually ended up timing my run-in so that I never take a 3 stack, but I'm still able to reach everyone with my buffs. And yeah, that was weird and rough. Like, I basically step in, see that I get the damage tick at 2, try to go in, and then back out, and I managed to do it where I only take the stacks. But even with that, my life was like at such massive risk from the constant, from the range on the Thorns of Death. And that was really, really scary. Another thing is these blooming abominations. With the tank needing to line of sight Quarry Swamp, the number of times these ads move last second and really scare people and put them at risk or force them into really compromised positions or positions they feel are compromised is really scary. But here's the thing. Again, those are good things to have to put your player base to the test on. Can they seem mildly inconvenient at the time? Like something you have to keep like a track of that you don't normally? Yeah, I can see that. But like the whole point is that not everything in this raid is conventional, and forcing you to think unconventionally only increases your skill ceiling and your skill floor even as an individual player. And so they weren't afraid to put that to work, and I'm kind of glad that they were, because as much as some things were like, oh, why would they do that? It's like, also, I'm glad they took the chance. I'm glad they did it. And I think it actually does work to some capacity, because I have to think about the fight in a different way than I normally do. And I think that actually worked really, really well. I think the constraints of the wall, I mean, that's really the only new mechanic is the constraints on the wall and the constant dropping of the seeds. Everything else is normal mode, pretty much. And the fact that it's fun despite that, impressive, because a lot of the times that idea just falls flat, fails, doesn't work. And I don't think that was the case here. I think some people will like this fight less than the other fights. I think that's fine. There's no reason not to. You can't just like Hector, our boy Brute Abominator here all the time, you know, unanimously without considering how the fight design here is actually affected by how similar it is to normal mode. But I think more people will be okay with a Savage Plus if it's of this caliber. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that was just kind of the point. But again, solid fight. I think it's a good fight. I think for a third fight in the second tier, which is usually a cursed encounter, we got a good one here. The normal mode was so good and so fun that it's, I think, beneficial that they kept it. So, you know what? I think that really is what it is. I think the normal mode was so much fun. I was hoping the Savage would be more fun and more crazy. And it is, without losing the essence of what made normal mode fun. So every reason the normal mode is fun is the reason the Savage mode is fun, because they're actually quite similar. And I think this is one of those few cases where it works. If the normal mode was really lame and then the Savage mode came in and was exactly the same, that would be bad. And also, if it was too drastically different, they'd risk it being worse than the normal mode even, and that has happened before. The fight could be harder on Savage, but it doesn't mean it's more fun. I mean, we saw that with Hegemony, we saw that with Agdistis in Pandemonium, and I think that could have happened here, and it didn't. So, again, clap. they broke the curse. The third fight in the second tier was not bad. I really enjoyed it. Not as much as M6 though, but yeah, good job. And with that, we can move on to the final fight. So for Howling Blade, they did a lot of conventional stuff with this encounter that I think works really, really well. A lot of this was just figuring out how to move and think as quick as it seemed Howling Blade was moving and thinking. So a lot of the strats and a lot of the callouts needed to be optimized in such a way that it could be very quickly communicated what the plan was and what that meant for each player's movement for most of the mechanics. This is especially true of Eminent and Revolutionary Rain, but even for mechanics like Windfang, you know, setting up the color pairs, you know, cardinal or intercardinal, in or out. This is a really standard thing, but it happens really fast here and it happens really fast later. So making sure everyone understands how it works so that they can do it kind of autonomously in the later part of the fight is super important. Now, Eminent Rain and Revolutionary Rain, probably the two mechanics most responsible for wiping runs, and that makes sense because Eminent Rain and Revolutionary Rain happen so early in the fight, so them wiping runs makes a lot of sense. But all it is the boss will jump in one of three directions, then dash across the room, then either do a conal AoE or a point blank AoE, depending on whether they did Eminent for the conal or Revolutionary for the point blank. And the call here that we had was a simple in or out. So Eminent meant in, int, so it meant follow him, and Revolutionary meant out, rev out, lutionary. Yeah, I know it's stupid, but seriously, things like this do help when doing callouts. Which meant that we had to come up with an orientation that worked for both, that was readily identifiable for both. It ended up just being like what side of the boss's hitbox you would end on when he was doing his final cast. So, for example, I was like group 1, so I was on I was to the left of him, looking at him wherever he was doing the mechanic, in or out. So if it was in, I would stand right next to him and look at him at the wall, and if he was out, I would look across the room at him and stand on his left. So coming up with a system like that is really important, but it has to be executed so fast. You probably have about 3 seconds total from the time that he picks his location from Eminent Rain here to the point where you need to be in a working spot. This is honestly all about coming up with a movement that requires little to no thinking. You don't want to, like, melees, it's a little more complicated because they're going to want to follow him when he jumps here. They're going to want to follow him when he jumps back to the other side. And then if they're really crazy, they're also going to want to go back out to their party. Our monk was talking about doing like thunderclap to the boss here, then thunderclap to the boss when he jumps to the other side. And then if it's revolutionary, jumping all the way back out to his party, to his group of his light party on the other side of the room after. And I'm like, okay, we're not allowing you to do that because we want to actually, we don't want to wipe over and over again. But like the fact that that can be a consideration and players will attempt to pull it off and will go for it and just squeezing out that extra damage is wild, cool, and fun. As for me as a Fizz range, where movement is my specialty, I basically get to just see this little slam right here, and I can already see that this, where my mouse cursor is going to be my end location. So if I know to just go here, wait till he dashes, go here. And that's kind of how you want to rationalize all of the attacks. It's basically just, can I do this in one movement, or can I do this in 2 movements? And for me, that's all it ended up being. It's just remember a spot relative to his hitbox, for me, just ahead of the halfway space right here on a side of the room that's agreed upon. And that's how we did it. Honestly, Revolutionary was way more of a headache because the tanks have to be in very precise spots or they risk killing the rest of the party or killing themselves. And I think what most people will find is the tanks die here or kill other people here. And yes, that's unfortunate, but it's very precise. It's very quick. Like if you don't have a scholar for expedience, I do recommend sprint for every time Eminent or Revolutionary is done. I can't think of a good reason why you wouldn't. It just seems like griefing to not sprint or do that here. And not to say you couldn't do the mechanic otherwise. You know, you have tools like Shikuchi, Elusive, whatever. Like, yeah, those tools are there. Gap closers, all that. But it's just tough. So it's hard for me to not, you know, just say, hey, take the obvious route and make sure you've got some movement speed here. Now, the next mechanic is a very standard one. I don't think it's really worth talking about too much. Millennial Decay. This is where there's just 4 sets of wolf heads. They, you know, they dash one at a time. They always start at either A or C, and they either go clockwise or counterclockwise. There's a knockback, which leads immediately into 4 spreads on one roll, and then the other 4 spreads on the other roll. I mean, nobody really needs to explain this. You just have to understand the cadence of taking the knockback, and then immediately rotating in the direction of the heads. So you see the head thing, it's rotating here. I'm just, chilling. I know to stay ahead of it, only just barely. So there's plenty of room for my supports. And that's really it. And then this is one roll gets selected by the dragon heads, and the other roll just does their color pair partner tower. It's a basic mechanic. It happens really fast, which is the scary thing about it. And it just is a matter of being confident in your movement so that you don't second guess, because the mechanic's so fast that if you second guess the decisions you're making, you're pretty much guaranteed to fall behind and die. Either you're going to die or you're going to kill somebody else. And then this whole mechanic where it's role-based, as soon as somebody's dead during the assignments of the tethers here, it's a complete crapshoot. It could pick 3 people from one role and 1 from another, or 2 and 2. It stops caring entirely, which can make then setting up the towers, even if you do have a raise on time for the towers, they just might not know where to go. Like, they have to so quickly analyze to try to fix the problem. And if you can, great, you should make the effort. But it's tough. So that's the only important thing that I think needs to be reiterated on that one. Now, Tracking Tremors is an 8-hit multi-stack attack. Oh my goodness. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the scariest mechanic of the entire fight. This thing hits so hard. I mean, it hit really hard in normal mode too. The AoE during the ad phase, as well as when Tracking Tremors happens, it only hits, I think, like 4 or 5 times in normal mode. Holy moly, this one's scary. I mean, everyone gets there and thinks, oh, just mitten heal. And then you get blasted because it's 8 hits in a row, and each hit is so massively strong. So, yeah, that's a really, really frightening one. Do not underestimate that mechanic in particular. Now, a mechanic you can underestimate is the Slice's Right tower that comes up here. Fenrir's power can be wielded in surprising ways. Yeah, he summons these 2 towers. Now, in normal mode, this mechanic's an absolute menace. But in Savage, like a lot of things, so many rules are in place to make it solvable that it actually becomes super, super easy. So, my way of doing this was simple. When Titanic Pursuit finishes casting, both of the towers will be cut in the same direction. So I line myself up with an intercard, in this case 1 and 3 markers, so northwest, southeast, and I look for a line. If there's a line going through the screen, like if I look to my left or in my right and I see a line going vertically through the tower, those towers are going to fall in the other directions towards 2 and 4. So I know that 1 or 3 has to be safe. If I see no lines, I know it has to be 2 or 4 that's safe. That's how I make the decision here after Titanic Pursuit. I don't see any lines. So because I don't see them, I know the lines are facing towards 2 and 4 at their respective towers. So from there, it's about figuring out whether 2 or 4 will be safe. And that comes to these new lift looking things. One of them will blast immediately through both of the intercardinals and across the room. The other will have will be more like an X, this one over here, and it doesn't blast through the 2 intercards. So I know one of 2 intercards is safe. I know only one of them is going to have this X pattern new lift thing here. And so it's a really quick thing to identify and call out. You don't really need call outs for this. I mean, it's just understand those 2 rules, and it's a really easy thing to figure out. Then you have Revolutionary Rain, which is just, this is again the one that I said is way more dangerous. In fact, I think somebody dies here because we try overcompensating and we end up clipping somebody and it kills them. It's hard to say. They might have been killed by the tank off on the other side. It's just that there's a lot of visual there and it's really easy for the tanks to kill people. So hard to say. Then we get the Tactical Pack. Now, this is probably the biggest blunder in design of the entire tier. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad phase. I'm saying that there's one problem with it that will only get worse with time, because it's one of those things where you actually outgear it and make it harder. Now, at its core, the mechanic is not too unconventional for Final Fantasy XIV standards. It's really quick. It's about a minute long. And there are 3 wind debuffs and 3 earth debuffs. The wind debuffs can disarm the orb, and the earth debuffs can disarm the cube. And the whenever they do, it gives everyone a short magic vuln and then removes their debuff. If they don't remove their debuff, then they just die instantly when it expires. So the idea is deal with an AoE from each of the heads, which is a tank buster and a baited AoE like the one you see on me here. And then between these attacks, you want to make sure that the people disarm the orb and the cube. Now, the orb and the cube have one other function that makes this phase not scale well with gear, and that is the function of taking 20% of the life off of the opposite element head. So when you blow up the wind orb, it takes 20% of the life from the earth head. And when the Earth head explodes, when the Earth head dies, when the Earth cube dies, it does the same to the wind head. The problem is that if a wolf head dies, whatever amount of pulses are remaining on the cube or the orb, they basically go off. And so if you hit, let's say you hit the wind orb and that kills the Earth head, the Earth head will then immediately blow up the Earth cube because it just died. But because you get a 4-second magic vuln from disarming one of the orbs or the cube, you've effectively wiped the group. So what's likely to happen is groups are either going to get really annoyed at needing to hold DPS on these heads as the weeks go on, or people are going to do something funny, like maybe they'll melee LB to a head just to make sure that you get way, literally ahead on one of the ads. And then you're no longer at risk for killing the opposite one when that one explodes. And then you just either need to finish killing that one when there's no magic vulns or finish disarming the actual cube or orb that is remaining. One of those two things is going to happen, but either way, I think that when getting more gear makes a mechanic more tedious to do because you have to withhold damage, withhold the amount of effort and skill that you exhibit as a player, that's a missed thing. And you know what? That used to happen a lot with A Realm Reborn. So the fact that they're trying to go back to what is realistically a Realm Reborn style ad phase, this is very much like Turn 11's Kalia. It's funny that that same problem returns, and it's a problem that they do need to consider overcoming. Killing a head doesn't have to necessarily blow up an orb or a cube. Why can't it remove the debuffs and you're just rewarded for having more gear? Maybe they wanted to preserve some of the difficulty on it, and maybe they'll explain it in the future. There's also probably other elegant solutions that could be considered as well, like blowing it up, but not necessarily having it be like a magic vuln in some capacity, or making it so that the head can't die from damage. You know, I don't know. There are ways to do it. Some of them aren't elegant, some of them are. But the point is, it's one of the blunders of the phase that's going to make this fight a little more tedious in re-clears as more and more people get loot. And the second half here speeds up, adds a few new things. And you know what? It does the Final Fantasy XIV Classic. It had spreads and stacks. That's all you need to do to make mechanics hard. One roll gets a stack, the other gets a spread, and then they swap. And it's just a matter of dodging a bunch of AoEs while doing it. Having a system in place so that players can very quickly identify where they need to go and puts them at risk of actually clipping each other while they are going there. That's really all you need. And then either Eminent or Revolutionary with the follow-up Dragon Heads, which is really just an attention check. It was an attention check in normal. It's just as much of an attention check here. You see those wolf heads on the side. You see someone get clipped and die. It's literally just an extra attention check while you're already several minutes into the encounter. The very last mechanic, we actually did in an incredibly risky way, or at the very least, it started as a risky way. So for Beck and Moonlight, these half-room cleaves have a lot of different patterns. You can have to, you know, there could be the chance that you have to rotate between every one. There's a chance that one side of the room is going to be cut off twice. There's a chance that 3/4 of the room is going to be cut off twice. And then suddenly you really only have one corner to work with, and then a separate corner during any of the individual slashes themselves. What we ended up doing is we identified a safe corner, and we could actually safely fit 7 people in that safe corner. What that allows us to do is put a lot of onus on the 8th person to pay attention to the cleaves themselves. So we had our most responsible melee and our most responsible tank be responsible for this outer position here where you see whoops. So myself and the 2 other DPS that are spreading to my left and my right and the 4 supports in the middle are all safe from the first 2 cleaves. It's up to Whoops to figure out which remaining quadrant is safe for him to dodge into and then get back to the middle of the room. So that requires him to pay attention to the Beck and Moonlight. We all are, but like for his specific assignment, he has to know for the first cleave, this half of the room is going to be safe. And I can go to that side. Now, you can actually, on this first one, dodge into an unsafe side of the room and then actually squeeze in before the cast bar finishes. It's very risky. It wouldn't be how I would recommend anyone doing it, but that's how he did it. So you can see he takes the spread here, immediately rushes in, but he was on the safe half of the room. He does that just in case he like maybe missees it or doesn't think, or maybe he just is worried that maybe he might have misseen it. Because if a cleave had gone through this side of the room, as opposed to the side that it went through, you know, if he wasn't as quick as he was, see how quick he gets in? That's basically, if you go back just a few frames, I don't have to go back too many frames. I have to go back until Moonbeam's Blade is castable. Basically, if Moonbeam's Blade finishes casting here and he's in the danger zone, he's gonna die. But he went so fast that he actually beats the Moonbeam Blade cast to the safe quadrant and would have dodged it even if it was in the danger zone. Now, this is actually one of those patterns where the same corner is just safe twice in a row. So the same rule kind of applies. We can just swap spots. This doesn't always happen, but you can swap spots with that one. Now, is the first spread AoE that was in a danger quadrant or wasn't in the 100% safe quadrant, the first one needed to look at which half of the room was open so that they could dodge safely and then come back. In the second part, it's actually, I think, a little bit easier, where the tank, who now has the spread, Keo over there, he is looking for wherever the third cleave goes off and then using that as the safe spot. So you can see that he's still in the group. Kind of scary to have a spread there. But this is the third cleave. Now that the third cleave has gone off, that guarantees that at the very least, the quadrant to our left has to be safe for the next mechanic. Because we already know this quadrant is 100% safe, and the other quadrant just had a dash go through it that was like perpendicular to our arrangement. So he can now dodge outward into that quadrant like so. And now we have the whole half of the room, and you can see we have the full 4-player spread and the stack in the middle. So making 7 people automatically safe goes a long way with this mechanic, and leaving it up to the one person, a D1, a D2, any of your DPS or any of your supports who's really confident in it. It puts a lot of pressure on them, but it also means that you can keep more people safe more consistently. That's how we solved it. I don't know if that's how other people are going to solve it or do it. It comes with its own risks, and I'm curious to see because I haven't actually looked at it yet. Then there's just these wolf head follow-ups and then a stone fang or a wind fang. It's always the opposite of the first one. So the first one was a wind fang on Cardinal. This one is a stone fang, which is out and spread on Cardinal. It can swap to intercardinal. It can do double Cardinal, double intercard, Cardinal, intercard, but it'll always swap between wind and stone for that particular cast. And this last little bit's a choke check and then a mitigation and heal check, because once again, you have tracking tremors as the last thing that happens. Then there's a raid wide, and sometimes there's 2 raid wides. The length of this phase is determined by how long the ad phase is. If your ad phase is pretty quick, then you actually get a second extraplanar pursuit here, which can buy you a couple of extra seconds to beat the phase 1 enrage. If not, sometimes he just skips right into it. It depends. And sometimes he also has other weird behavior where he'll interrupt an extraplanar cast to go to the second phase. Like, he won't even finish the cast like he does most of the time. He'll just stop casting it about halfway through. Now, there's of course a debate every time a tier comes out. Is it a door boss? Is it not a door boss? I actually thought this could be a door boss. There was no clear indicators that it could or couldn't be, like there was with Wicked Thunder. And it ended up not being a door boss, but it still ended up being a cutscene. This is very relatable to E8S Shiva, who also puts you into a cutscene and then returns, but doesn't give you a checkpoint. That also has an ad phase beforehand, but it's done in a somewhat different way. And this actually makes the fight pretty epic and pretty long. It's like a 14-minute encounter if you include this cutscene and the encounter length of this last bit. But they managed to break it up in such a way where there's a bit of a knowledge check at the very beginning. So you have to figure out how the first few mechanics work. The Quake 3, the extra planner. A lot of it is just figuring out platform assignments. Quake 3 actually is a stack marker that is really more like an enumeration. It is a body check. If you do not have exactly 4 people on your platform, then you die. If you have 3, the damage multiplies by 4 times. So it becomes unsurvivable with 3 no matter how much MIT you have, unless it's like a tank LB3. But it also hits the entire platform. You don't actually need to stand directly on the person who's marked with it, and it does target healers. Then you have Ultraviolent Ray, which becomes about establishing a priority system for this mechanic. So you need to be able to quickly look at who's to your left, who's to your right, and depending on how many people with the marker over your head have it, they need to move. Now, fortunately, Ultraviolent Ray either targets all 4 DPS and 1 support, or all 4 supports and 1 DPS. So it means that by splitting into light parties, you're going to always have a minimum of 2 people on each side, and then one of the 2 sides has 3. So when you have the side with 2, the northmost one goes towards the north platform. When you're on a side that has 3, the person sandwiched in the middle doesn't move. The southmost one goes south of platform, and the northmost one goes north of platform. Then you just got to pay enough attention to see that there's these half rooms from the bear fangs that are in the back. Well, I mean, they're just his fangs, but the name of the mechanic that summons them is called bear fangs. Twin Bite's a double tank buster. This also hits the entire platform, so this is a platform check for your tanks as well. And then you have Hero's Blow, which is a half room plus an in or an out. And this is all just information for mechanics you're going to need to do later. And it occupies, again, the first, 15%. Again, this is something that is very Final Fantasy XIV-esque. I mentioned it with Dancing Green, but it happens again here with Howling Blade. It also begins to test your ability to do a mechanic and then get back into a position that allows you to quickly read follow-up mechanics. An Ultraviolent Ray right after. The ability to do a 2-minute buff window on these very irregular platforms. And I haven't even talked about that yet. This is not just a wall boss. This is a donut boss with 5 platforms and the use of a teleporter that takes you between them that will interrupt your cast. Again, this is them not being afraid of people going like, oh, I can't cast while I'm teleporting. Wah. They don't care. They're like, listen, you want more interesting stuff. You want different. We're going to give you different. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you won't. But it ends up working out really well. And if you time it right, the teleport is so quick, you might not even lose a GCD if you actually just do a GCD, then take it, and then worry about it after. Like, I didn't even wait there, and I still don't get interrupted. Same there. I just go, and I don't actually miss a GCD. I only miss it if I try to go onto the teleporter right as the GCD starts rolling. So you don't even have to really worry about that. Then they also remember that these teleporters are your only way to go between a platform, and they utilize that. They make it so that the platforms give you a longer debuff so you can't swap nonstop while you're doing more strict movement. So the fact that they made sure to consider that, made sure that was part of the mechanics is really important. And then this is kind of like a more traditional dance. You know, there's a tether that needs to get passed around that does one thing. There's another party that needs to be at another thing. And you need to make sure that you don't have a magic vuln when you're getting hit by any of these things simultaneously. So that's a mechanic that really solves itself. You know, you realize the tether is giving you one and that the cleave is giving you another. It has to be solvable with the magic vuln. That's like a pull it once, see what it did, and you'll probably figure it out style mechanic. Then you just have an AoE check. That was really interesting about this mechanic here, Champion Circuit. At first, it seems really intimidating. The boss is going to be rotating, doing AoEs. There's half rooms coming from behind you. There's ins, there's outs, there's donuts, there's sides. But I noticed very quickly that the boss's animations mean that these AoEs are completely consistent relative to where they start. Where the boss is looking is always a cleave directly through the center of the platform, which means the sides of the platform are safe. The side of his body that has the wolf does a donut AoE. Both of his shoulders have wolves on them. They're opposite of each other. So the two in AoEs, the one like we're doing right in front of me, they're always opposite of each other. So there'll always be an in AoE and then something else, and then depending on which it is, the other in AoE after. So for example, the way this is rotating, I can see that the out, which is always behind him, also is coming next. I don't even need to look at the rest of the pattern. I know that if the next one is out, the only feasible pattern is in, out, in, donut sides. I don't need to look at the next AoE that's coming. I don't even need to think about it because the boss is 100% consistent in which AoEs are where relative to his body, and it never changes. All that changes is what thing you're doing first, what direction he's rotating, and what direction he starts looking at. If this had gone the other way, I would have known immediately that it was insides, donut, in, out. That will never change. So that makes it so you have all of your brain power to pay attention to the half room AoEs in the back, which if you're not paying attention can surprise you, give you damage downs, and maybe even potentially kill you. And these don't always alternate every time. Sometimes the same one fires twice, like that right there. The same one fired twice. So now the other one's going to fire, and then the last one's kind of a crapshoot. So I just need to be ready to react to whichever it's going to be. I see which it is, and I go. And then from there, it goes back to being a how quickly can you get back into position check. There's the Quake 3. There's the Ultraviolent Ray. Excuse me. There's Tank Busters. It's just a really fast-paced attention check full of a lot of really, really scary visuals that any longtime Final Fantasy XIV player and raider can probably identify pretty quickly. It's a far more traditional fight kind of encapsulated in this very substandard arena. Like, it's just not the type of arena that you expect to have. And the teleporters make the movement a little bit more interesting between them. Then there's even just this last mechanic where it just tethers. The quote-unquote brain-dead version of this mechanic where both of the healers are south and then both the tanks are northwest and all the DPS are east. It basically just makes it so you can do one movement and solve anything. And it's honestly like, it's just super easy. It's just a matter of like, I see I'm long, so I'm opposite the tank. That tank sees that they're the long tank, so they go to that specific platform. Both the healers never move. The healer who's tethered to a DPS, the DPS just comes to them. And for the tank and DPS that are tethered and are short, they just need to go to the same platform and meet together at the same time. The only real variable to this is the towers. But 3 of the towers are always in the same spot every single time. The southmost tower is always a tower that requires 3 people. So the far healer, the short healer, and the DPS tethered to the short healer. The southwest and southeast platforms are always 1. So the far tank and the DPS that's tethered to the far tank. And the only variable is whether the remaining 2 and 1 tower are northwest or northeast. And all that happens there is the long tank and the long tank. No, the long DPS, the DPS that's tethered to the long healer, and the short DPS and short tank all gather on one platform. If it's 1 tower on that platform, then the pair of 2 goes over. And if it's a 2 tower on that platform, then the far DPS goes over. And everything is solved. Now, what's also important is this Hero's Blow. Now, this is just like the first one where it's a half room AoE plus an in or an out. But these teleporters are red. So you only have 1 hop because of the 6-second cooldown where you can decide where to go. So you have to solve the mechanic in 1 hop or you're going to get hit and probably die. So 2 platforms are completely covered no matter what during this mechanic. 1 platform, the platform he's looking at, is half covered. And the 2 remaining platforms are only susceptible to the in or the out mechanic. So the easiest thing to do, identify which side of the boss is dangerous. So we see it's his left side. Now, you need an indicator to kind of know where the middle of his hitbox is. In front of the boss, it's really easy. He has his target reticle in the direction he's facing, so you know to get to the other side. But the big direction is, where do I want to hop? And the big tell here is his flank arrow right here. If you're on the dangerous side of the boss, and you know you're on the dangerous side of the boss, you just teleport away from this. So I know I have to go this way because he's swinging on this side. This is the arrow, so I won't go that way. I go this way and I'm safe. I'm behind him, so I know the whole platform I'm going to is actually safe, even though I do kind of huddle up in the corner on his closer to his right flank. These people have to do it in 1 hop also. They have the target reticle in the front up here, so they know they need to hop over and then do the mechanic on the opposite side of the boss. That pattern recognition just makes this Hero's Blow, which is otherwise a really, really dangerous one, solvable really quick. Now, there's an Ultraviolent Ray. It's the very last mechanic before the end of the fight. And you only have about 4 seconds starting right now when these teleporters go back to normal to get into that same lineup that you used before. Now, you could come up with another strat. You could eyeball it, but realistically, that lineup of 4 has so many benefits that it ends up being the primary way that I think most people should be solving it. So how do you get into that? You have no idea what direction Hero's Blow is going to be. You don't know where your party's going to end up. You don't even know where you're going to end up and what direction. Like, you just don't know. But you do know that 2.5 platforms are safe. A platform to his front, a platform to his rear, and a platform on his flank. If you treat the flank platform as his new true south, the one in between the other 2 safe platforms, then Light Party 1 left looking at the boss, Light Party 1 looking right at the boss, and just be really fast. Like, this is definitely a sprint moment where you want to be able to get to your correct platform. We were lucky. We had 3 people right in front of us that already belonged on this platform and only 1 person that had to come over. So we could quickly line up. We see the markers come out. We can actually see our 4th member coming over. If they have this marker, it's on them to look at us and kind of identify. It's on us to look at them and identify that even though they should technically, like, if we were to be lined up perfectly based on our order of tank DPS, support DPS, they would be in the middle and they would be sandwiched between us. This is where the common sense eyes can come into play, where you can see them on your right and go, okay, they're already there. And they should also be able to look like I'm already here. And there should be that like kind of common body language where now only the one remaining person needs to actually do anything. That would only work if there were 3 on our side, though. They would also need to be aware that if they look at us and they only see 1 and then that they have 1, they know they need to keep running. So there's a little bit of like a situational awareness thing here that can come in handy a lot, where I notice that they're on the way. They don't have 1, which means we're the 2 platform, which means I go north. Bam, mechanic solved. And that's the last major mechanic you actually have to do. It is so important that as soon as that's done, everybody gets back to the same platform. Realistically, we did what was our new true south, which is where you can see Whoops is standing right now. And we don't really make it, but fortunately we're able to adjust because now you're into the enrage sequence. Howling 8. These are 8 hits that are very quick, hit very hard, and everyone needs to mitigate and survive them. And then he destroys that platform with Mooncleaver, so you need to go to the next one. There's a lot of little nuance here that comes down to just go from platform to platform, mitigate, heal, survive, and finish the boss, because this is his enrage sequence. So our strategy was that we did the party mitigating all the hits here on the 1st and 5th platform. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th platform, we had the tanks handle in their entirety. Now, we do lose a healer here, which, let me tell you, I was freaking out about, and I slipped up because of it. But if that happens, everybody needs to make sure when you leave a platform, even though I know this is going to be the tank platform, I can't leave this platform early because who he targets with Howling 8 is random. So if he targets me with Howling 8 and I'm on the platform to our right, I cut off everyone from being able to use the remaining platforms because they can no longer hop between them. It cuts the entire number of platforms we have in half. And let me tell you, that's not good. So you want to make sure to be patient here. So what we decided to do was tank super cooldown the 2nd tower. For each platform that is destroyed, Howling Blade hits harder and harder. So for tank super cooldowning, doing it by the 3rd platform at the latest is kind of as late again as you want to go. You could tank invuln 2 and 4 and then super cooldown 3, or you can super cooldown 2 and tank invuln 3 and 4. The only difference is that the twin bite from earlier, if you super cooldown the 2nd one, those tanks are probably going to need help, because they really should be holding defensives for this. So they need to make sure any defensive they use there will actually be back up here. I ended up giving them Troubadour, and I think they got like, you know, a Sun Sign or whatever the heck else from our healers as well. You know, they make sure that there's addles, reprisals, feints. This is like the best place for one of them, especially if you're like a double melee comp. Or I'm sorry, that twin bite would be, because with the super cooldowns here, it's not too bad. Now, with only 1 healer, this part's a bit scary. So our healer has to spend a GCD getting the other healer up. They have to wait till their body drops. They have to wait till they're targetable again, and then they have to get them res. And that's a lot of stress. And then both tanks need to be kept alive. Super cooldowning doesn't make this do nothing. It just makes it do, you know, it just makes it survivable by 2 tanks. So what actually ends up happening, because of that mistake, we're not able to have both of our tanks healed properly, and we lose one of them. That's fine, because then we just need to get them up. And I actually make a critical mistake here. I do go to the next platform. I don't take my advice, which is why I'm mentioning it. I try to get close. If he had faced me here, it was a wipe. Bottom line, like, I could have wiped us there. Like, it's just all on me. But then from this point on, we have tons of time to recover. We just need to make sure that paladin is up in time to do the next invuln. But it's invuln 1, then invuln 2, then the final platform. It's everybody pop every defensive that you have, survive it, and finish the boss, and bam, you have that 14-minute monster of an encounter that's super fun, super engaging, and super fast. It will not feel like 14 minutes went by in this encounter. It'll feel like 5 went by. And if you're going to give me a 14-minute encounter, if you can make it feel like it only took 5 minutes, then that's fun to me. And yeah, it's a really long enrage sequence. It's almost a third of the boss's health. And it's scary. It's scary, it's fun, it's fast, it's everything. And not to mention that in terms of health threshold, you want the boss at about 28% in order to actually be able to finish it off if you're playing well enough. We had it at 24.5. And then with those deaths, we do just kind of like barely beat him before this Star Cleaver here. Yeah, we still had like 3/4 of the Star Cleaver cast, which is the final enrage cast. So we could have shaved off another probably like 2%, because that's actually a 1-minute window, maybe even more. We could have shaved off 2.5 to even 3%. But yeah, it's whew, that's an encounter. It's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite final encounters that we've had. I love the length of it. I love the speed of it. And I love its mix of conventional and unconventional. It definitely feels closer to a conventional Final Fantasy XIV fight, despite them taking a risk with the teleporters as a mechanic. And I'm glad that's the case, because if you're able to incorporate things we're not used to seeing, but still keep it of the same high quality that we want and expect, that means that you have come up with a creative idea that is iconic to the fight that we're doing, and simultaneously in no way detracts from its design in any other way. So when I say that this tier was a great tier, it's because every idea they had, almost, I will of course knock a point off for the wolf heads potentially scaling poorly with multiple reclears and more gear. Basically almost every single idea worked. Every single fight is unique. Every single fight is iconic. The music is top tier, and they've just created an all-around awesome raid tier that I think will get easier with gear, but will not be less fun with more gear other than those wolf heads. And I think the PF will really appreciate how much they see gear affecting things like their M6S clears on the weekly, and how well they can get through things like without enough perfect grooves, etc., etc. So big claps. I said clap after every fight, and there's a reason, because they just did a phenomenal job with this entire tier. I could go on talking about it all the time, but I'm not gonna lie, if they can just nail one more tier, Arcadian's gonna be up there as one of my favorite tiers of the entirety of Final Fantasy XIV, the entire raid series. Sorry, not even tier, entire raid series. And Cruiserweight, you were exactly what we needed to see. After people have been very harsh on Dawn Trail, they were harsh on balance of fights for Fruit, for M4S. And they're still a little harsh on it now, because Viper's just kind of a monster in places like M6S and anywhere where there's ads present, and they're able to make use of Uncoiled Fury, which is in a lot of places here. It's this is not so much focused on that. Everyone's really focused on the design of the fights, and even when jobs are advantageous, it's at a point where it won't matter within a week or two, and it will no longer be part of the discussion. It's really only a hardcore raider thought concern problem, and I don't think many hardcore raiders even remotely care when the tier is as fun as it is. So thank you, Square, for giving us a fantastic tier. I loved breaking it down. I loved figuring out all of these mechanics. We were behind, the leading team. So for some of the mechanics, we looked ahead. It looked at diagrams. I'd say the biggest example of that would be the last phase here. Whereas the other phases, we kind of tried to stick to things that we knew or things that we had, or made alterations to things that our knights recommended. But all the same, making sure we understood all the rules, dug a little deeper. It was a blast, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it, and I hope a lot of people enjoy it, so we can keep having really fun, unique, and awesome encounters like these ones. So that is going to be a wrap. I am going to get this video rendered and ready, so hopefully you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more Final Fantasy XIV. We got Cosmic Exploration coming up. We got Occult Crescent. We got podcasts. We got all sorts of things on the channel, not to mention our weekly Final Fantasy XI videos, as well as our Final Fantasy Platinum series, and maybe some other things that I'm going to be adding to a regular spot on the channel. I just want to be able to give you guys all regular content that's Final Fantasy or RPG themed, as I have over the years. So thank you for watching. I will see all of you in the next one, and until then, take care.